So excited to be with you today. Really excited for this conversation. I'll go ahead and, actually, question for the room. So how many folks in this room have deployed AI coaching, practice, role play kind of platforms already? So show of hands. So we see probably in the ballpark. Okay, a few. How many are in the early stages or even the middle of an evaluation of some of these platforms? Okay, another good group of hands. How many find this space, you're curious, interested, confused, overwhelmed, don't know where to start? Okay, some hands. This is an insanely fast-moving space and a very confusing space. The pace at which the landscape has changed has been pretty crazy. And I've talked to a lot of people that are really interested in this idea of transforming learning and skill development, and they just don't know where to start. And so we structured this session such that we could just be very kind of real-world, hands-on, practical, like how did it go, what advice, and so for that, really excited to share the stage with Adam. I'll introduce myself, and Adam, you introduce yourself, and
Sure.
we'll get into it. My name's Josh Vitello. I lead go-to-market at Yoodli. We are an AI kind of skill development, training, coaching, practice, role play platform. So what we endeavor to do is help organizations drive the impact, effectiveness, and scale of, how do we help people sort of become their best in the variety of roles that we have within our organizations. That can span all kinds of roles, but I think where we typically find ourselves spending the most time is within kind of revenue and revenue adjacent teams, because I think the line between impacting the knowledge that one has to do their job and the skills that they have to do their job and kind of top line business impact is the easiest to quantify within our businesses. But then there's no shortage of sort of kind of adjacent opportunities for driving skill in learning in service of business outside of the revenue organization. But that's probably where we'll focus the conversation, especially given the nature of this event. So I'm responsible for the go-to-market team, so is all the customer teams at Yoodli, and we are working with some of the most demanding, kind of large and generous and great partner kind of organizations, many in tech, but pharmaceuticals, financial services, is sort of spanning industries at this point. And we'll talk about what that looks like in the context of ServiceNow. So, Adam.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Great to be here with you, Josh. My name is Adam Sones. I am the Director of Program Success Center of Excellence at ServiceNow. My team sort of persists across all of our various learning teams across ServiceNow that focus on our sales enablement programs, our leadership development programs, early in career and individual contributor sort of development and enablement programs, along with like our product and engineering learning teams. And we work to really drive like standardization, excellence, innovation across all of our various learning programs. ServiceNow, if you don't know ServiceNow, we are an automated and AI-driven workflow platform. Your business may use this to like automate IT or HR or legal workflows like across different departments and organizations. We have about 30,000 people globally, and about 10,000 of those folks, a little under 10,000, are part of our go-to-market organization. That includes all of our AEs and SCs and BDRs and all of that, but along with that, our customer success organization sits there too. So excited to be here with you today, Josh, talking through Yoodli.
Thank you, appreciate it. This QR code is for the Slido, so we'll try to make room for some questions at the end, but if you have questions throughout and you hit this, you can kind of hit them, and then when we distribute the deck at the end, the presentation will add a asked questions section so that we can make sure we answer everyone's questions as well. So if you don't already have it, grab it. Watching phones, okay, cool. Before going into a smaller kind of growth stage AI company, I spent a large part of my career in a company called Salesforce by way of an acquisition from a company called Tableau Software. And a lot of folks at Salesforce, I know a lot of people at ServiceNow because there's a lot of migratory patterns between Salesforce and ServiceNow. And one thing that I noticed talking with sales leaders within your company is that the learning, development, enablement, readiness organizations were held in like very high regard. I know that the partnership between the business can be incredible. And there was a great session on executive sponsorship yesterday, and it can also be challenging. But that was one thing I was really impressed by. I was like, wow, this team is like really respected. And so what I'm curious about is if you can kind of talk about like, what was the animating business problem that resulted, some 18 months ago, where you started to investigate like some sort of transformation in how you're driving learning and skills development?
Yeah, sure. I think the obvious thing here is thinking about like rep performance, right? Like that's what we're all here to do, is to drive performance for our sales folks. Rep participation is a really big target for us that we are looking to drive. And I think that's obviously the table stakes, right? But beyond the metrics and things that we are trying to push for in terms of performance, we have a strategy at ServiceNow that is really centered around this concept of a playground for learning. I actually love that we followed Rachel's session. Great job, by the way, as we talk about like play and how that impacts learners, and just the importance of being able to play in like a psychologically safe environment where you are safe to fail and try new things and get feedback about those failures and get back up on the monkey bars, and maybe you go one monkey bar further because you got that feedback. And that is the conditions that we are looking to create for learners at ServiceNow. So we have a strategy really centered around that. We needed to really, when we were sort of evaluating, Yoodli and these other sort of role play platforms, and we needed to really evolve our approach away from static content and courses and more towards this personalized experiential learning where folks could practice something in that psychologically safe environment, get that feedback, practice again, right? And we create that sort of flywheel effect. And we didn't have anything that really resembled that. A lot of our content, a lot of things were really sort of like legacy, like, hey, let's create some courses, push those courses out, right? And that was really what we were looking to do, was like align the way that we were able to deliver enablement with the strategy that we had in place. And so that was really the challenge that we were trying to solve for.
Okay, great. So everything you're doing is driven, of course, because you're trying to drive, you believe training and helping people acquire the knowledge they need to do their jobs is tied to performance and tied to business outcomes. You believe that building skills is tied to performance, and so that's a good starting point. Like, do you believe that, or yes or no? If you do, then like, how do you go about doing that? And you developed a strategy around that, and then from there, you went on a journey of trying to figure out what kind of partners should you work with, what kind of process should you put in place to evaluate within a landscape that looks quite different on a month-to-month basis. Mm-hmm. Like, how did you do it?
I guess the criteria that we were looking for here was really centered around maybe two different buckets, right? The first bucket here was, are learners actually going to do this? Like, do learners actually care about doing this, and will they actually engage? And does this then give them the feedback that they need to sort of get better and grow? But that first sort of, are people actually going to like show up to the restaurant? Or I think Kate was talking about like if I make the meal, are you going to eat the meal? Like yesterday, that's exactly what we were looking at. It was like, hey, is this something that like if we invest time and money and resources and everything into something like this, will people eat the steak that we prepared? And so that was a very critical piece of not just the way that we rolled this out, but the feedback that we wanted to gather early on from actual learners, and not just sort of evaluate this from our perspective. So we started there. We actually, before we evaluated Yoodli and other role play vendors, we actually implemented and did a couple of AI coach pilots with some sales managers across our EMEA and AMS regions, and those were a massive failure because we rolled these out, basically said, hey, like your sales managers, here's an AI coach, here's some use cases for you, here's the link where you can go find the coach, and we sent them on their way, and these folks accessed the coach on the first day and never came back ever, and maybe one or two did, and that was great for them. But what we realized, and one of the big lessons that we learned from all of that, was that if people aren't going to actually engage with this, then it doesn't matter how good the tool is. It doesn't matter how good the intelligence is. Folks have to engage. So that was the biggest I think, criteria for us. Beyond that, you know, we wanted to make sure that this was a strategic fit for our playground for learning strategy. We also wanted to make sure that the data that we were capturing, that we were actually able to capture data that helped us understand growth, and B, does that data then actually drive performance? That's a very challenging thing to correlate, and I don't think that we've really even figured that out yet. But we wanted to make sure that the data we were able to capture was helpful. And then I think that the third part of that was, as we looked at this platform, working with instructional design teams and folks who are actually going to be creating these role play scenarios, were we able to like ship things quickly, or did it take, you know, like 6 weeks to develop a role play and then we had to iterate and get a ton of feedback, et cetera? Or what was the overall design life cycle? And that was something we wanted to make sure was simple and easy, not just for learners, but also for instructional designers or program managers or any folks who are going to be actually developing those role plays.
So Adam, you talked through sort of criteria and also some like learnings from some failure. What was the process you put in place to then sort of test whether these criteria would be met?
Yeah, so we have a really stringent evaluation process when we look at different vendors. We evaluated 10 different folks across kind of a big matrix, I will say, a big messy spreadsheet that looks at functional criteria of the actual platform. So things like the overall learner experience, customization, are we able to really like customize this to our needs, and evaluate based on like criteria in those categories, where we have a sort of a scale of 1 to 5, whether or not it meets that criteria, along with like a priority. So is this a top priority, a medium priority, or a low priority for us? And then we calculate a score based on that. And so we have functional requirements that we look at, and then non-functional requirements as well. And these are things like security, compliance, right? Like are they SOC 2 certified? Things like that. So we evaluated based on a ton of that criteria. And that is the sort of the process that we looked at when we were trying to understand like what are the what really matters to us, and then also like how do these different vendors and folks kind of stack up against that criteria.
Question about that. So there's a couple points of emphasis that you made around kind of like, will learners actually care? And I think there's sort of a tongue-in-cheek remark made, sort of like, salespeople aren't going to do this stuff. And as someone who identifies as a sales professional, I was like, well, I kind of take exception to that a little bit, because I think when we deliver experiences that, as a sales professional or a sales leader, that I believe is going to help make me better. I remember I shared the story with a couple of people yesterday, but I remember like not knowing if I could make it as a salesperson. And then I remember working with people who were really dedicated to like the sort of the craftsmanship of the work, and those were either like sales leaders or they were sales enablement professionals, and they talked about the work in sort of its bits, and in sort of like this aspirational way of like, can you imagine like how cool it would be is if you had this capability, and then what that would unlock for you? And I started to really think about this like less about making a W-2 and more about the intrinsic reward of the work, and like what could it mean for me in my career, and how cool. And once someone helped me connect the dots to that, it changed everything for me with regard to how I performed and what kind of opportunities became available to me. And so I really believe that salespeople if they see the value in the thing, will sort of enthusiastically participate. And I think sales leaders will enthusiastically have their people participate if they can connect the dots, so that it becomes incumbent on us to connect the dots. So my question is, on the learners actually cared, you rolled it out, it didn't get used. So what did you learn, and then what did you do that caused you to have confidence about that dot connecting in your process?
Yeah, sure. So when we initially ran like a proof of concept for Yoodli and rolled this out, one of the things was like getting feedback from learners about their experience and whether or not they they felt like this was something that would give them more confidence to show up on calls prepared, right, to talk to customers, if this was something that was very relevant to their actual lives, and we weren't shipping out like these scenarios that they're practicing that have zero relevance to the conversations that they were having with customers. And so we got some feedback from folks that participated in our early sort of proof of concept. And overall, like we measured things like the relevance and the confidence, and those were like 4.5 out of 5, right? So we got really high scores related to that. We also measured things like, hey, was this easy for you to use, or was this complicated? Did this take you a while to figure out? And overall, like CSAT, right? So overall satisfaction. And those were 4.7, both of those out of 5, which I think is really high, especially when you consider the audience of sales professionals who are maybe not as likely to give great positive feedback about some training. And we got really, really good early signals that like, hey, this is something that folks are going to actually show up for and engage in. One of the other really big pieces here for us, when one of the early use cases was around early in career folks who are like in more of the customer success organization, first time ever really having a call with a customer, and we had an onboarding academy for these folks. This is where we saw probably the most engagement, right? Where people are developing confidence, they're getting reps, they're practicing right before they talk to a customer for the first time. And I mean, we had one user who in the proof of concept, over the course of I think 4 weeks, who engaged with the platform 75 times, right? So she went 75 role plays, right? Not all, like multiple practices across different role plays, but these were folks that were coming back over and over and over. And we got some feedback from the program managers that these people were showing up a lot more confidently prepared for actual customer calls than their peers.
One takeaway is you all, kind of back to like the sort of rigorousness of the process. Again, given the fact that it's a noisy space, and again, sort of a proof is in the pudding space, like you held sort of vendors accountable to providing sort of access and support so that you could really effectively validate. And so by the time you get to a decision point, you were like, we know. Mm-hmm. That'd be a recommendation I'd make for anybody, is like, don't get to a point of we think. Hold vendors accountable to show up, provide access, support, and see like, is this going to work? And I think it's a really important way to figure out if, what are the use cases, how to design them, what is it actually going to feel like post transaction. It's not just the platform that you have, but it's also like, what's the strength of this organization's ability to support us like beyond, because the use cases that you envision today are not the use cases that you'll be rolling out, 6 months, 12 months from now. Like, the sort of the sky's the limit, and so you want to have some. There needs to be some, predict what that's going to look like in terms of what the partnership is. But okay, so speaking of beyond the decision, if I can advance, you rolled it out. How'd it go?
Good. Overall good. That's why I'm here. So the way that we rolled this out, we started out with like a proof of concept. We had about 200 users. This was like last summer, I think, in July is when we rolled this out. 200 users. That ended up scaling to about 4,000 users for the rest of 2025, essentially. So we did about 4 months with 4,000 users, and really we were looking at evaluating, beyond the feedback that we were getting, like the scalability of this. Like, is this something that, even if we wanted to roll this out across the entire enterprise, could we? Do we have the capacity to do that within our own organization without having to hire role play engineers or whatever, right, to actually design these scenarios? And again, if we rolled this out, like, would people actually do this? And so we had 4,000 users with some really, really well-defined use cases that we rolled out, both in the proof of concept, but then also in this sort of extended pilot that we did. And then from there, we've scaled to almost 10,000 users at this point today. We have up to 13,000 licenses that we've purchased, and we've activated a large chunk of those. Overall, I mean, you can see some of the metrics here that we are looking at to help us sort of indicate like leading indicators of success here. We are seeing like a ton of, like you see the almost like 9,600 or 9,700 hours of practice. I mean, that's folks who are going to the platform, practicing, doing role plays. And I think that's something that's really important to track and to see. We also have decreased seller ramp time from 3 months to 6 weeks for a certain set of our seller population here as well. And overall, again, with the pilot, we had 94% satisfaction from folks as well. So the rollout I would say was really, really successful in terms of like how we were gathering feedback and what we were trying to measure. So yeah, one of the other things that I think is really important here is the way we rolled this out. We had really well-defined use cases, so we knew exactly what we were trying to what we were trying to accomplish here, right? So we had actually 4 separate use cases. One connected to like an upsell motion that was paired with an actual like course, right? So like folks went and took like an e-learning course essentially, and then were able to practice that upselling motion in this role play. Another was centered around like a new product features that were launched. Another around this onboarding academy for customer success early in career folks. And then a 4th one was really around like a coaching program for AEs, where we really just kind of gave them the tool and said, hey, create your own scenarios. And so yeah, we had very, very well-defined use cases and audiences for this, which was really helpful for the rollout.
Earlier you talked about a fail of sort of giving access to the platform to a lot of different people and saying, go have fun, and then learned that didn't work that great. And then here you've talked about one of your 4 use cases is giving it to the AEs and telling them to go have fun. What was, well, one, did you get to it? Was there a better result from that? And what was different about that caused it to be different than the first time around?
Yeah, I think the difference there was that they had support sort of along the way. So there was a program manager who was actively like, hey, here's yes, create your own use cases or create your own scenarios, but here are some guidelines and like here's sort of a weekly drip of things to focus on, and that was really what helped that sustain the engagement, I will say. One of the more interesting things that we've noticed, we did a sort of a strategic business review with Yoodli a couple of weeks ago, and like if you're not aware, folks in the platform, if you are an end user of Yoodli, you can design and create your own role play scenarios. So like if I'm an AE, I can create a scenario about an actual customer conversation that I have to have tomorrow and practice that. And we looked at all of the role play scenarios that have been created in our Yoodli instance, in which there were around like 900 and plus, something like that. Lots of role play scenarios. One of the interesting stats was about 75% of that 900 was created by members or end users themselves. So these are not role play scenarios that our instructional design teams creating and rolling out to folks, but these are actually end users creating their own scenarios, practicing things that are very, very hyper-personalized to their own contexts. So that was a really interesting stat that kind of blew our minds a little bit. Like, oh, not only are people engaging with the stuff we're rolling out, but they're also creating their own scenarios to practice, for their own conversations.
It seemed like a takeaway from that was like, if you kind of start with that, and if that's like the objective, and it's a kind of a tough road, but if you start to socialize this capability, improve value of this capability, you start to pull people in, and people get start to creatively think like, well, what could be, and the fact that you've enabled them to do that. I was really surprised about this. We usually encourage people to have really well-defined kind of problems that they're trying to solve, really defined use cases, and also like executive sponsorship, like we talked about yesterday. Like, does this matter to your leaders? Because if it does, people will do it. If it doesn't matter to your leaders, people detect that, and then it's hard for them to invest in it. And this is a situation where you said, well, we did all that, but then we also kind of gave the people in a really self-directed way, and you start to see the flywheel start to spin a little bit, which is like the learning playground idea starting to kind of like bear fruit. It's so exciting. Talk about what has not gone well, or what you would have done different, and like advice for the group.
Sure. Mistakes. I don't think we made any mistakes, actually, at all. Do you want to flip to the next one?
Yeah.
So I think honestly one of the big mistakes that we made was scaling so fast. We went from 200 to 4,000 to 10,000 very, very quickly, and now we are going back and getting some, what I will say, are embarrassingly fundamental governance practices in place that we did not start out with. We were a little kind of obsessed with getting this into the hands of our learners, and what we didn't do was create some like foundational pieces of how do we think about like the back end administrative piece of Yoodli and who has access to what, and how do we make sure that we are governing the role play creation process. We didn't do that very effectively, and that was something that I would say is a step that we should have taken in the beginning. I think the other piece is just making sure that we were focused on getting like the integrations with Yoodli right from the get-go, and then also like sustaining that over time. So we partnered really well with our IT organization to get this sort of onboarded, but then after that there was a lot of other sort of sustaining integrations that we needed to do, and we sort of lost a little bit of connection and partnership with them, and that was the other big piece, was like continuing to stay lockstep with our IT organization was pretty critical. So now we're trying to go back and get things like the MCP connection, where folks can access Yoodli directly in Claude, and Claude can create roleplay, kind of sort of spin up role plays based on the context from a Claude conversation. Is something that we're trying to go back and stand up now.
Okay. Thanks for that. What's the future look like?
The future, I think one of the things is we're looking to really move away from the role play term. I think the term role play, I feel like, is sort of the new e-learning, right? Where people are sort of already over it in a sense. And so we're moving beyond that and really just talking about, like, how do we think about this as experiential learning? We have a lot of AI tutor functionality that we are exploring as well, where, like, consider one of the features in Yoodli where AI can, like, share, like, you can upload a PowerPoint deck and the AI can share its screen with you and walk you through specific slides. I can ask questions, it'll flip to the relevant slide and walk through those things. I can share my screen with Yoodli and say, hey, I'm trying to do this, can you help me understand what to do? We're really exploring how to use this as, like, an experiential learning platform beyond just the typical customer conversation role play or manager to direct report role play. We think this will help us really hyper-personalize all of our learning, and especially as, like, the pace of change regarding our product and our customers' needs evolves. This is going to help us really keep up with that pace. Beyond that, we're exploring some additional use cases outside of go-to-market even. We have a whole customer escalations team in our product and engineering organization that, like, handles very irate customers who are calling about our issues with their instance of our product. And these are very technical people who are getting on the phone with very irate customers. They don't know how to handle that, and so we're talking about how do we use Yoodli for those instances as well. So that is sort of what the road looks like for us.
It's interesting on the word role play. I've started to get tired of the word role play myself, and we really kind of, that was like kind of our anchoring kind of like messaging for quite some time. And then there's, like, the role play experience. Like, I'm a solutions engineer and I have to demo and I have to hit my marks. I have to show certain screens and I have certain talking points to hit. That's effectively the role play technology, but I don't think people associate that as a role play experience, because what people think of when they think of role play is me with my manager up on stage in front of people embarrassing myself, and now I do that in a more non-judgmental way with the AI. But again, when you move into, like, from role play to, like, no, this is sort of like a simulation of a real world kind of execution kind of practice experience, and then the sky's the limit in terms of, like, how you design the context of that situation. It sort of helps unlock kind of the imagination of the person who's trying to, like, solve the problem. So
totally,
that's a good note I would remember. I think we have time for questions. Love to take hands and get microphones around. So microphones, because we want to make sure that people who watch the recording can hear the question. And he's trying to get his steps in.
Thank you.
I counted 5.
Right. Someone write that down.
I appreciate the presentation. A couple questions. One is, you mentioned you created a rubric scoring 1 through 5. And you had 200 initial users. Did all 200 users have access to that rubric? Were those the people grading the solution, or was it a different group?
That's a great question. The rubric was evaluated with our team only, so that wasn't our end users evaluating with that rubric. Those were 2 sort of separate data collection strategies. One was around, like, how we were evaluating the platform, and that was what that rubric was. The data that we captured from learners was more like a survey, sort of like, hey, tell me about your experience with this platform, and, like, understanding CSAT and usability and confidence and things like that. But those were 2 separate processes.
Cool, thanks for that. And then you mentioned you reduced ramp from 3 months to 6 weeks. At Zscaler, we always kind of go back and forth at what the definition of a ramp is.
Yeah.
I'm curious what it is at ServiceNow.
It's from new hire to being productive, right? So, like, how do I get through a onboarding, or sort of onboarding academy, right? And on calls with customers. And I don't know the specific definition of it by any means. the sales enablement is sort of tangentially related to like my role, but that is, and I will also say that that was with a smaller sort of subset of our users. This is not all of our go-to-market function too.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
For sure.
And while you're going to the next question, yesterday you were talking about like the importance of rubric and like the platforms need to be able to support sort of like, you know, I guess the requirements you have for rubric design. Can you talk about like what you mean by like how you design the rubric has everything to do with how the actual experience performs?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of the criteria that we're looking at is very, very specific in terms of like, are learners capable of doing X, Y, and Z thing? Like we very much got in the weeds of exactly what we were looking for to design that rubric and make sure that we were sort of evaluating this criteria based on like the needs of what our executives had expressed to us. That was the other big piece of this, was executive buy-in and sponsorship early on happened for us. We were able to get like our chief learning officer, even one of our chief information officer, or our CTO rather, they were both bought into this, and that was the other way that we were able to move so quickly on this, is sort of everybody organized under them because we had that executive sponsorship so early.
So your goals, your competencies, your methodologies, wherever like the rubric becomes a place where you kind of encode that, which will then inform what the role play experience looks like, but then inform the coaching and the data that comes afterwards. So anyway, questions are over here.
Yeah, so one of the things I really liked was giving the AEs freedom to design their own role plays. Most of us know here AEs are pretty spooked by just the word role play.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, in hindsight, as you were talking about what would we have done differently, was the governance around that. So how do you straddle that? Because I'm excited about the idea of AEs creating their own role plays, because that's buy-in, that's engagement, and nobody's judging me, I can do that. And then you talked about governance at the same time. So I'm just curious to understand that.
Sure. We have given a lot of guidance to folks about like how to create role plays, how to structure those role plays, what are the best sort of goals to incorporate in a role play rubric when you're creating those for yourself. We've created a whole sort of I hate to say e-learning, but e-learning course around it, and given that as a sort of a jumping off point for folks. In terms of the governance, the good thing about that is like when an AE creates their own role play, it kind of goes into their own personal instance, and that's not necessarily something that's shared unless they elect to share that with their peers. That's just something that's sort of personal to them. So we don't necessarily feel a need to govern that overly govern that process. By all means, just go and create the role play. And if you would like to share that with your team, you can. But the governance is really more applicable to our like an admin side. So all of our folks in our learning and development team, instructional designers, and others who are creating role plays and shipping them out broadly, that's where we are lacking governance a little bit. Yeah.
If I may ask a follow-up to that, is when you think about the results, how you're measuring the results of the performance, not concerned about activity. As a leader, what I want to see is, did your skill improve from March to April or March through May after doing the role plays? Were you able to measure that?
Absolutely, yeah. Every role play has like goals that you create, and there's specific goals. And the really interesting thing about Yoodli in particular is those goals persist across different role plays. So like, let's say I have a goal around discovery that rates my ability to have a good discovery call. I can create that goal in a specific role play, and then I can also add that goal into multiple other different role plays, and I can track performance over time regardless of the scenario, right? So it will give me a score. I can track skill growth on a particular goal, and it's not the same role play that I have to continue to do. So that's one of the things that was really critical for us as well, was getting that sort of like trackability and like seeing how people are sort of progressing over time regardless of the scenario that they were in.
So that's a good segue into my question, because we are actually in the evaluation of tools like Yoodli. And I've always found it really curious that when I'm talking to these vendors, that the ability to hand over the reins to AEs and let them create their own scenarios doesn't seem to be table stakes. It's actually, for me, that actually blows my mind, because one of the holy grails of what we do is just-in-time learning, just-in-time enablement, and that's just-in-time learning at scale. And yes, I care about, did your skills improve, but I ultimately care about what my CRO cares about, which is the bottom line, which is, are your numbers improving? So my question is, we're evaluating solutions like this, is what should be table stakes in the space of Yoodli, and what is your differentiator, and what are differentiators you're seeing in the market?
Do you want to take that one?
I'll take a shot and I'll you to edit it from the perspective of someone who went through an evaluation. I have the most biased view on the stage. But I think, in one thing we're kind of coaching the team to is the day we come up with some clever new messaging around this platform, it sort of seems like the entire space sort of has the same kind of talk track. It's very difficult to differentiate with words. And so that's back to kind of the argument that I'm making here is hold us accountable. Get the platform deployed, through a validation exercise, whatever kind of POC kind of process, and hold vendors accountable to supporting you through that. Where our differentiation is, I think, the richness of the experience, and so how dynamic of an experience can you design? So is it the role play that you have in your mind, on stage with your manager, kind of just doing the back and forth, or how active can the AI be? How close to the personas in the variety of personas that you engage with? Are you in a multi-persona situation where you have sort of procurement and finance or whatever, or are you in a multi-persona situation internally? I got to learn how to work with a solutions engineer, and I've never worked with a solutions engineer before, and the AI can kind of play that role. I'm sharing my screen, the AI is sharing their screen. I'm hitting my marks along the way. So it's the richness and realism of that experience. I think good enough today will absolutely be not good enough in a couple months. The things that blew people's minds last January are just seem like basics now. So I think as people learn, minds blown, and then sort of set a new expectation of what bare minimum is changing so fast. And so I think it's okay, does the experience meet the requirements we have today, and are we betting on somebody that is making investments in innovation fast enough that we think they're going to continue to lead the pack? I would look for evidence that you're choosing someone who has that track record and is making the investments that they'll continue to have that track record. I hope that helps.
The only other thing that I would add, because I also know we're way over time, is the table stakes for us is the richness of the feedback that learners are getting, and the actionability of that feedback is critical, because without that, practice is great, contextual practice is better. Contextual practice with really, really rich feedback that learners can actually use to grow and change and do something different, that is the table stakes for us that I think is the differentiator for Yoodli in particular, beyond the features and coolness and things that will blow your mind. That is the piece that I really feel is what our learners care about the most, is oh, this is helpful. This is helpful for me. So that was one of the table stakes pieces for us.
Do you want to try some of the questions on that?
Sure, if we're allowed.
Yes.
Okay, so beyond the course and scenarios, what data does it need to be accurate and relevant?
And this is probably maybe related to maybe the third question here as well, but the way that we sort of train the AI and what we need to do there to create a scenario, we actually do create. There's a lot of different categories that we're able to plug in. We can upload data into and upload context into the back end of the platform when we're creating the scenario. We have the option to sort of customize the AI's personality and how it shows up. We have the option to customize the rubrics in the role play as well, and there's a ton of customization centered around some of those scenarios. We don't have to provide as much data as we want, but we do have the option to upload documentation and give sort of a large context window to the AI. So that's the sort of the data. That's the way that we stand that up. In terms of how much time on average does it take, is we've shipped scenarios in a day, where we used to create role play, or we used to create e-learning content that would take like weeks, we can now create things very, very quickly. So we've reduced that sort of development life cycle pretty tremendously.
And for JC's fourth question, how often is the AI off track from what you want? What is needed to train the AI? You sound like you're sort of touching on that a little bit with your answer to the first question, but can you comment on that as well?
Yeah, the AI, in terms of getting off track and on track, the more context you give it, the more it's going to stay on track. But one of the interesting features about Yoodli is you can create sort of a variability. There's a variability slider in there where you can say, hey, I need you to stick exactly to the context that I've uploaded here, versus it's okay to vary a little bit from this. And so that's one of the ways that we've been able to keep things on track when needed.
When you think of a highly regulated industries, like that becomes really, really important, because there's some kinds of training that there can't be no AI improvisation. In some scenarios, you need improvisation big time. So, okay, we're way past.
Yep.
Thank you, sorry.
You guys will be available on the break as well to answer any questions or any follow-ups.
We'll be here, and it's Adam, it's myself. We have Courtney right here. We have Alan, who runs our support program. And yeah, let us know, and we'll follow up with these. If any other questions hit Slido, we'll get them into the deck that we distribute later. So everyone, thank you so much.
A big round of applause, please. Thank you very much.